I texted my in-laws, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" My mother-in-law replied with one word, Uber. That was it. No punctuation, no warmth, no effort. I stood there outside LAX, suitcase in hand, the California sun blistering through my blouse, and realized I wasn't returning to a family. I was walking into a performance. They had rehearsed their smiles, curated their lives, and cast me as the disposable extra. But they forgot one thing. I've spent my entire life being underestimated, and I don't retaliate loudly. I rebuild in silence until power shifts. And tonight, it just did. They greeted me like I belonged there. Warm smiles, practiced hugs, and overeager compliments swirled around me the second I walked through the marble entryway of the Whitmore estate. A tray of champagne floated into my hand before I could take off my coat. My mother-in-law, Elizabeth, air-kissed both my cheeks like we hadn't just exchanged a one-word text. "Rachel, darling, you look radiant. Travel suits you." Her voice was all satin. Her eyes were surgical steel. The annual Whitmore Fall Gathering was a glittering showcase, not a reunion. Laughter too loud, wine too polished, faces too taut. Everything sparkled, even the lies. I glanced at Chloe. My 7-year-old daughter stood near the archway, clutching her favorite sketchbook, peeking nervously at the grown-ups in silk and smugness. She waved at Aunt Emily, my sister-in-law, who was standing by the fireplace in a backless emerald dress, perfectly posed for Instagram. Emily didn't even flinch. Her eyes flicked past Chloe like she was a ghost. No one acknowledged her. Not the cousins who used to dote on her. Not the aunts who used to send birthday cards. Not even Daniel, my husband. He poured himself a drink, nodded at me like a colleague at a conference, and turned back to the conversation with his cousins. "Don't take it personally," Elizabeth whispered, leaning toward me, smile unmoved. "Children get overwhelmed at events like this. Better to let them fade into the background. Less pressure." I clenched my jaw. "She's not overwhelmed. She's ignored." Elizabeth let out a melodic little laugh, as if I'd made a charming joke. Dinner was served at precisely 7 RT. We were seated by place cards. Of course we were, and mine had been carefully set next to Elizabeth, 2 seats away from Daniel. Chloe had no place card at all. A quiet panic flared in my chest. "I didn't see a spot for Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Oh," Elizabeth replied lightly, "we assumed she'd be eating early with the staff. The caterers prepared something child-friendly downstairs." "She's not staff. She's 7. I rose from my chair without thinking. "Then she sits with me." There was a flicker across Elizabeth's face, something restrained, cold-blooded, but she smiled again. "Of course. We'll make space." A server awkwardly brought over a chair. Chloe climbed up next to me, too small for the table, too quiet for the room. She reached for a roll. The silver tongs were subtly pulled away. She asked for sparkling water. She got tap. No one said a word, but everything screamed. At dessert, Emily stood with a clink of her spoon against her wine glass. "Everyone," she said, beaming. "Mark and I are getting married this spring." Applause erupted. Champagne was raised. I looked at Chloe, who had started to smile, trying to be part of the moment. Emily added, "It'll be adults only. No kids. We want it. Elevated." The room cheered again. I looked at Daniel. He avoided my eyes. Chloe's smile slipped. She folded her napkin and stared at it for the rest of the evening. Later that night, in our guest suite, while Chloe slept curled into a ball at the edge of the mattress, I scrolled through the family's group chat on the iPad Daniel had left unlocked. I didn't mean to snoop. I was looking for a photo someone mentioned earlier, but something stopped me cold. A meme of a crying baby. Captioned, "When you're the accidental +1 no one invited." Reacts, hearts, laughs, crying emojis. Sender, Emily. Responses, LMAO. "Poor Rachel, at least it's not genetic." And then a voice note from Elizabeth, sent only to Emily. "You're right, darling, she's not a real Whitmore, that child. She doesn't even have our blood. You know what I mean. I froze. My mouth went dry. What the hell did she mean? I opened my hidden photo vault. I hadn't looked at the picture in years. It was a stupid night, long before Daniel and I were even official. His brother, Nathan, and I were both drunk. Stupid, young, broken. It happened once. One time, I did the math. Again. I had done it before. I had buried it. But Chloe was born 7 months after that night, and Daniel never asked questions. The screen flickered in my hand. I looked at my daughter, asleep, innocent. And for the first time in years, I saw the truth through their eyes, through Elizabeth's words, through Emily's cruelty. They knew, and they had let me walk into this house thinking I was still safe. The next morning, everything was normal. Elizabeth poured coffee into a porcelain cup with monogrammed gold initials, as if she hadn't called my daughter a mistaken code. Daniel kissed my temple like he hadn't spent the night silently turned away from me. The sun streamed in too perfectly. The room was too quiet. Chloe was already outside in the garden, drawing flowers with chalk on the stone patio. She had no idea. I envied her ignorance more than I could admit. Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his phone. "Mom wants to do brunch at the club," he said casually, like it was just any other day. I said nothing. He looked up. "You okay?" I stared at him. "Do you know what your mother said about Chloe?" He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I reached for my phone, but stopped. If I showed him the chat, I'd have to explain how I got it, what I saw, what I knew. I wasn't ready to tip the board yet. I needed more. She said Chloe wasn't really a Whitmore, and Emily called her an accident. Daniel sighed, shaking his head like I'd accused them of murder. "Rachel, come on. You know how they are. They don't mean it that way." "That way?" I repeated. "They're old school, dry humor. It's just how they talk." "Daniel, they erased her last night. There was no seat for her at dinner. No one looked at her, and you said nothing." He set his phone down, his voice soft but firm. "They're older, Rachel. Let's not overreact. You're letting little things get to you again." There it was. Again. That word. I was overreacting. Sensitive. Emotional? Too much. Elizabeth entered the room, perfectly timed, holding a dish of cut fruit. "Everything okay, kids?" I forced a smile. "Lovely, thank you." She placed the dish down, sat beside me. "Daniel tells me you've been feeling a little off lately. Maybe the travel or the stress. I used to get that way too. Hormones, probably. Or maybe it's watching my daughter get iced out of her own family," I said, voice even. Elizabeth's smile didn't budge. "Rachel, you've always been passionate. That's part of your charm. But sometimes passion can cloud things. We love Chloe. She's just spirited. And sometimes that makes people unsure how to engage. It's no one's fault." I nodded slowly, like a student being corrected. I knew what this was now. I'd read about it. I'd seen it. But living inside it was different. They weren't just dismissing me. They were rewriting me. I wasn't a mother protecting her daughter. I was unstable. I wasn't angry. I was hormonal. I wasn't hurt. I was hysterical. That afternoon, while they played croquet and laughed too loudly for what the game deserved, I sat in the guest bedroom, opened a fresh notebook, and began to write. Every phrase, every omission, every pause. I cataloged it all. I became my own anthropologist, charting the ways women are bent until they break, and then blamed for shattering. Day 1. Chloe asked if she could help set the table. Patricia said, "Let's not risk the good china." Day 2. Emily posted a photo from dinner. Cropped me out again. Day 3. Daniel told me I seemed distant. I asked if he noticed how no one had spoken to Chloe directly all day. He changed the subject. I didn't argue. I stopped. I smiled when needed, nodded politely, but inside, I was gone. Not broken, not even angry anymore. Just absent. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see. I started going to bed earlier, skipped meals with them, listened more than I spoke. I wanted to see what they did when they thought they had won. And that's when I saw everything. The way Elizabeth's eyes scanned the room for cameras when she whispered sharp things to her friends. The way Daniel's fingers twitched every time I asked about our finances. The way Emily practiced her laugh in the mirror. It was a performance. But they didn't know I'd stepped backstage. One evening, I went into town alone. Said I needed fresh air. I ended up in a boutique with locally made furniture and found it. An antique full-length mirror. Tall, wooden framed with delicate cracks in the corner. I bought it without a second thought. Had it delivered to the estate. When it arrived, I placed it in our guest room, right across from the bed. That night, while everyone dined without me, I stood in front of it in silence. Not to admire, to remember. I watched myself breathe, watched my chest rise and fall, watched my hands tremble and steady. I wasn't weak, I wasn't broken, I was awake. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open. I logged into my private investment account. I'd kept it hidden from everyone, even Daniel. It held years of freelance consulting income, stored quietly, grown silently. $250,000. I transferred it to a newly registered business entity I had opened 3 months prior, Fifth Chair LLC. No one knew about it, not yet, but they would. Fifth Chair wasn't just a name, it was a reminder that at every table they tried to keep small, every room they curated to exclude, there was always one more chair, mine. The invitation came wrapped in ivory cardstock and silk ribbon, sealed with a Whitmore family crest. An exclusive brunch celebrating Charlotte Whitmore, hosted by Patricia herself, set at the Conservatory Club, an elite venue known more for its guest list than its cuisine. Daniel handed it to me with a shrug. Looks like Mom's finally appreciating you. I didn't believe that for a second, but I went. The club was all glass and restraint, sunlit and suffocating. Rows of gardenias lined the centerpieces. The guests, society women, journalists, minor politicians, smiled too wide. Champagne flowed like a spell. The cameras clicked nonstop. Patricia took the podium, her voice soft and glowing. We're here today to celebrate a woman who reminds us that grace and ambition are not mutually exclusive. Charlotte Whitmore has shown that one can be both modern and devoted, fierce and gentle. Applause. Flashbulbs. Microphones angled toward my face. I smiled, not because I was flattered, because I saw it now. They were building me into a narrative, a shiny, pliable character for their script, the perfect daughter-in-law, the illusion of inclusion, public praise to control the private story. After the speeches, Patricia looped her arm through mine, pulled me into a quiet corner, and whispered just loud enough for it to cut. You're good at this, you know, the smiling, the pretending. I was worried at first, but you've proven you belong. I looked at her. I'm not pretending. She laughed softly. Of course not. Daniel stood nearby, glass in hand, watching. I caught his eye, waiting for something, anything. A flicker of disagreement, a defense, a step toward me. He took a sip instead and turned away. And that's when I felt it, fully, with no filter. Betrayal. Not the loud, theatrical kind, the quiet one. The kind that hides in silence, that leaves you defenseless against charm because it wears the face of someone who swore they'd stand beside you. Later that night, when Chloe was asleep and Daniel was in the bath, I opened the hidden drawer in my suitcase and took out a business card. Black foil, no logo. Just a name and a number. I called. The voice on the other end was brief and clean. 2 days. Everything digital. No trace. I hung up. My hands were steady. 48 hours later, a courier delivered a box the size of a pastry tin. Inside, layered beneath tissue paper, was a Godiva chocolate box. It rattled oddly. I opened it. File after file. Emails between Patricia and her attorneys. Daniel forwarding financial records to her months before our wedding. Contracts I'd signed, tucked into our engagement phase, buried under romantic language and misdirection. My heart thundered. My name was there, just not in the places it mattered. I hadn't noticed. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. The condo in Aspen? Solely Daniel's. The stocks I'd been told were ours. Legally transferred before we married. Even the engagement ring, an heirloom they'd said, had a clause to be returned upon dissolution of union. And the worst? A memo to Patricia. Subject, contingency strategy in case Charlotte initiates separation. It detailed projected financial risks, PR management plans, even potential dating prospects for Daniel to maintain family image post-divorce. I sat in the dark, the mirror still facing the bed across the room. They had always been ready to let me go, just not with anything in hand. I stared at the documents, every line of legal text a dagger I hadn't seen coming. But it was the packaging that gutted me. The deliberate choice to place everything inside a box meant for sweetness. The message was clear. This was a gift, wrapped in civility, delivered with care. I slid the files back into the tin, rewrapped the ribbon, and placed it beneath my clothes in the closet. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Power, I was learning, didn't scream. It waited. The first episode aired on a Tuesday. No names, no locations, no revenge. Just a voice. Clear, calm, deliberate. I recorded it in a single take. No edits, no retakes. I called it My Polite Prison. I was welcomed into a world of fine china and finer smiles, I said, where love came with contracts and silence was the only acceptable form of gratitude. I didn't even realize the door had locked behind me because it was never slammed. It was closed with a thank you note. Within 48 hours, the podcast had 20,000 streams. By the end of the week, 1.6 million. Women wrote in from gated communities, penthouses, country clubs, church circles. Messages flooded my inbox. I thought I was the only one. You said what I couldn't. They called me emotional, too. No one asked for names. They didn't need them, because they already knew who I was talking about. At breakfast, Elizabeth folded her paper slowly. Have you heard this new podcast? It's all over the news. Some bitter woman airing her laundry to strangers. I poured my coffee. No, I haven't. Everyone wants to be a victim these days, she continued. No one takes pride in quiet strength anymore. I looked at Daniel. He stared at his phone, jaw set, eyes distant. Later that afternoon, I walked into the study and found him listening to episode 3. He didn't pause it when I entered. He didn't even look at me. She's painting us as monsters, he said finally. I never said us. You didn't have to. I didn't argue. He wanted me to feel guilty, not for lying, but for telling the truth. The episode ended. He turned to me, eyes narrowed. You're embarrassing this family. I smiled. Which part embarrassed you more? The manipulation or the receipts? He didn't answer. By the following week, I'd been contacted by a dozen publishers, 2 documentary teams, and 3 women's rights organizations. I turned them all down. I didn't want a spotlight. I wanted a flashlight for those still trapped inside. That's why I launched Fifth Chair Live, a traveling workshop focused on financial autonomy for women in emotionally controlling households. Our slogan was simple: control your accounts, control your voice. Our first event sold out in 3 hours. I wore a simple navy jumpsuit, no jewelry, no makeup artist. I stood behind a folding table in a modest hotel ballroom and spoke to a crowd of 65 women who all carried the same look I once wore, polite exhaustion. I taught them how to read a prenup, how to hide assets legally, how to build an exit plan, even if they weren't ready to use it. And during the Q&A, I told them this. They taught me to be grateful for being tolerated. They called my silence strength, but freedom doesn't come from being quiet. It comes from not needing their permission to speak. Thunderous applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was long, sustained, like rain after drought. And then it happened. A journalist from a regional news blog released a story, one that had nothing to do with me. The article detailed suspicious tax activity linked to a well-known family foundation, undisclosed real estate holdings, questionable donations. Names were redacted, but the sources. A former employee, a financial advisor, a board member's assistant. It didn't take long for the internet to connect the dots. Patricia's charity had been siphoning funds for personal use. Elizabeth Whitmore was no longer the matriarch of Grace. She was now under review. I didn't say a word publicly. Instead, I found myself in the restroom of the hotel after our third workshop. The room was quiet, tiled in beige marble, mirrors framed in gold. I washed my hands, watching the water slip over my fingers like I was shedding something. And then I saw it. My ring. The one Daniel had slid onto my finger with all the theatrics of a staged proposal. It had always felt tight, even when it fit. Now it slipped off like it had never belonged. It fell, clinked once on the edge of the porcelain sink, rolled, and dropped straight into the drain. I looked down at the empty space on my hand, and I smiled, not out of cruelty, out of peace, the kind you feel when something that never fit finally stops pretending to. The file sat on my desk like a bomb waiting for its trigger. Inside was everything. Offshore accounts, falsified donations, ghost employees on payroll. I hadn't collected it. I hadn't even asked for it. The evidence had come to me. Some anonymous whisper of solidarity from someone inside Patricia's empire. A silent ally, maybe. Or just someone tired of pretending. The email that accompanied the file was short. In case you want to finish what you started. And I could. I really could. The final episode of my podcast was scheduled to air in less than 12 hours. Titled, The House of Silent Women, it was a 40-minute exposé, part memoir, part reckoning. It didn't name names, but anyone who had followed the breadcrumbs would know exactly whose voice echoed through the walls. I'd recorded it at night, the window open, one glass of red wine in hand. My voice was tired but unshaken. I used to believe silence was grace. That swallowing pain made me noble. But what they called dignity was really compliance. And what they praised as poise was just me learning how not to scream, until now. But as the episode countdown ticked closer, so did Daniel. He showed up at my rental apartment, alone, no driver, no entourage. Just him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but something in his presence had shrunk. I didn't ask how he found me. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, hands in his pockets like a schoolboy caught cheating. "I know why you did it," he said. I raised an eyebrow. He sighed. "The podcast, the workshops, all of it. You felt invisible, and I let you." That wasn't an apology, but it was more than he'd given before. "I never wanted it to be like this," he added. "We were good once." "Were we?" I asked. He stepped forward. "Rachel, Charlotte, I don't even know what to call you anymore, but I'm asking, can we just stop this? Can we start again? No podcasts, no press, just us. Us. A word that used to mean something. A word that once held late-night laughter and shared French fries and whispered dreams in bed. But now? Now it felt like a memory trying to dress itself as a future. "I'm not sure," I said quietly. "I still remember loving you." His eyes flickered with hope. "But I also remember begging you to see me, and hearing nothing but your mother's voice in return." He sat down, head in his hands. "She's not who I thought she was." "She is. You just didn't want to know." Silence settled between us. Not heavy, just final. He didn't stay the night. He didn't ask to. When he left, I poured myself another glass of wine and opened the burn file again. I could release it anonymously, send it to every journalist who had emailed me, upload it to a dozen cloud drives and let it detonate across the internet like wildfire. Or I could send it to one place that actually mattered, the IRS. The email was ready, addressed, attached. My finger hovered over send. I didn't feel rage anymore, not even satisfaction, just a kind of cold clarity, the kind that comes when the pain has passed and all that's left is choice. And that's when it hit me. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to be free of them. That wasn't the same thing. Revenge, I realized, still required connection, still tethered me to their rules, their names, their legacy. But freedom, real freedom, that meant walking away and never looking back. I clicked send. Then I opened my podcast dashboard and deleted the final episode. No warning, no drama, just silence. The next morning, headlines exploded. Tax fraud allegations target high-profile foundation. Anonymous tip leads to federal investigation. Whitmore family under scrutiny amid financial controversy. I didn't watch the news. I went to the farmer's market. I bought tomatoes. I asked a stranger for directions to the post office. I complimented a child's drawing with genuine joy. No one knew my name, and that was the point. A week later, I moved into a cottage on the edge of a quiet town no one talked about. No paparazzi, no social media check-ins, no curated brunches, just space and soil, and the sound of my own voice returning. I didn't use the name Charlotte Whitmore anymore. I used the name my mother had before she married, the name I was born under, Rachel Lynn Harper. It wasn't an erasure, it was a reclamation. I kept the mirror from the estate, the antique one I'd bought months ago. It now stood in my bedroom, sunlight bouncing off the edges. I didn't look into it often, but when I did, I saw someone I recognized. Not someone new, just someone real. I started teaching workshops at the local community center. Nothing flashy, just budgeting classes, small business coaching, resume help. I printed my flyers at the library and handed them out myself. One day, a woman stayed behind after class. "I used to listen to your podcast," she said, eyes scanning my face. I smiled. "That wasn't me." She paused, then smiled back. "Okay." We didn't speak of it again. That night, I sat by my window and wrote in my journal. They taught me that power was being feared, but I learned that power is being free. And the most radical thing a woman can do is walk away quietly and mean it. I didn't write a memoir. That would have been too easy, too indulgent. I didn't want to tell the story of what happened to me. I wanted to tell the story of how women like me survive it. So I wrote a guidebook instead. Invisible Daughter-in-Law. It wasn't flashy. No bold cover. No staged author photo. Just matte gray, black letters and a small olive branch illustration on the spine. The subtitle read, "A Quiet Guide for Women Trapped by Family-Shaped Expectations." Each chapter was stripped down, practical advice, not poetic pain. How to identify manipulation masked as politeness. How to recognize when silence becomes a prison. How to prepare an exit plan without burning your life down in the process. I never named anyone. I didn't need to. The book spread slowly, the way truth often does, by whispers, by recommendation, by someone passing it across a table with a look that said, "I thought of you when I read this." I didn't do interviews. I didn't sign copies. I just planted an olive tree behind my cottage, near the back window where the sun hits first every morning. It started as a thin stem in a black pot. I placed it in the ground myself, palms deep in dirt, sweat at my temples. It felt sacred, not like revenge, like release, a tree that symbolized peace, wisdom, and rebirth. The irony wasn't lost on me. By then, the investigation into the Whitmore Foundation had gone public. Financial audits, charitable fraud, a dozen redacted subpoenas. Daniel had stepped down from his board seat. Patricia was nowhere to be seen. Their family name, once synonymous with refinement, now hovered in headlines like a cautionary tale. And me, I wasn't involved. Not legally, not publicly, not anymore. My hands were clean, and more importantly, so was my conscience. At night, I cooked simple meals, drank tea, and read old books with yellowed pages. I had a record player that skipped slightly on my favorite track, and I liked it that way. My world was small, quiet, entirely mine. Once a month, I hosted a workshop in the library's basement. Attendance was limited. We capped it at 15 on purpose. Folding chairs, handouts stapled at the top, a kettle of weak coffee on a side table, no microphones, no Instagram stories, just women, some young, some older, gathered to speak about things they weren't supposed to say out loud. We called it Fifth Chair. The name didn't need explaining. The women knew. On one particular Tuesday, near the end of spring, the air outside sweet with new grass and thawing soil, I finished a session on boundary building when a girl raised her hand. Early 20s, sharp brown eyes, nervous fingers that wouldn't stay still. "Can I ask something personal?" she said. "Of course." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving everything?" I didn't answer right away. The room was quiet. Not expectant, just still. The kind of silence that invited honesty, not performance. I looked at her, then at the others, and I said, only when I thought I needed to be loved to exist. There were no gasps, no applause, just a breath, released all at once. That evening, the head librarian pulled me aside. She was a soft-spoken woman with bright silver hair and a stack of overdue notice slips always in her hand. "I have a favor to ask," she said. "Of course." "We'd like to name the community outreach wing after your foundation, the workshops, the book. You've helped more women than you know." I didn't cry, but something inside me softened. The next morning, the plaque was installed, the Fifth Chair Foundation, and beneath it, in small engraved letters, for every woman who was told the table was full.